Hello friends of the Stories at Mark channel. Welcome everyone. Today's topic is the 10 most absurd facts about America. 10 shocking cases of grave injustice in Latin America, each with a powerful story, brutal impact, and one that still resonates. Worth using for your viral content, with attention to detail, emotion, and reflection. Napapa Massacre, Argentina. The government decided to violently repress the protest. The result, an estimated 400 to 500 indigenous people were killed in a single day. Latin America reports the Argentine state was declared responsible for this incident as a crime against humanity. Latin America reports, why is it absurd? Because it involves the state attacking vulnerable minorities, structural injustice combined with explicit violence. Those Rincon Bomba Massacre, Argentina. October 1947 in northern Argentina. In what was then the territory of Formosa, the state attacked the Palaga indigenous people between October 10th and 30th, 1947 using aerial fire. Executions and forced labor estimates ranged from 750 to 1,000 deaths. Wikipedia in 2019 Wenti, this massacre was finally recognized as genocide. Wikipedia impact, decades of silencing, removal of land rights, destruction of entire communities. 3. Dos Masacre Guatemala. December 6, 1982, during the Guatemalan Civil War, special state troops surrounded the village of Dos Aires in the department of Petén and committed one of the most brutal acts of violence. Men, women and children were massacred. Some reported children were thrown into wells. Estimated death toll over 200. Wikipedia +1. The Guatemalan state accepted responsibility years later. CJA.org. Shocking. The massacre was not simply an isolated event, part of its scorched earth policy against indigenous populations. For example, Massacre Salvador, May 13th to 14th, 1980, during the Salvadoran Civil War. Government forces and paramilitaries attacked civilian refugees near the Sumpo River in the department of Chalatenango. Between 300 and 600 people died. Wikipedia. The Honduran state was also implicated in preventing refugees from escaping. Why remember this? Because it shows how state brutality extends to vulnerable people, and how certain crimes go unjustified for a long time. 5. Massacre de Tlatelolco, México, 2 de outubro de 1968. In the heart of Mexico City, protesters, mostly students, gathered to demonstrate when military forces stormed the square and opened fire. Estimates vary, 300 to 400 dead, or possibly more. Wikipedia. This event has become a symbol of brutal political repression. Viral factor, students, protests, authoritarian state, ingredients of tension that continue to resonate. 6. Actil Massacre, Mexico, December 22, 1997 in Chiapas. The indigenous peace group Las Abejas was participating in a prayer meeting when a paramilitary militia, with the government's consent, murdered 45 people including children and pregnant women. Wikipedia. Clear injustice, defenseless victims, complicit state, belated memory. 7. Juliaca Massacre, Peru, January 9, 2023. During protests in Peru, primarily by Aymara and Bolivian communities, the national police opened fire, resulting in at least 18 deaths and over 100 injuries. Wikipedia. Relevant. It's recent, occurring in a context of political tension, and shows that injustices aren't just a thing of the past. 8. Peasant Uprising of 1932, El Salvador. 1,932 peasants and indigenous people revolted against unsustainable economic conditions in the country. The government responded with military intervention. An estimated 25,000 people were killed. Wikipedia. Why so serious? A mass massacre, little remembered compared to others. It shows that social injustice plus repression equals tragedy. 9. Genocide against the Mayan people, Guatemala. C. Ijoba. In Brazil, the Guarani Kiowa indigenous community faces what researchers call Caiocide: death, violence, displacement, and stolen land. In Mato Grosso do Sul, shootings, mass suicides, marginalization. esmat.tj2.just.br+1. Importance. Injustice, not just historical but ongoing, helps impact audiences who care about the now. Imagine a continent brimming with culture, faith, and struggle, but also marked by deep wounds, scars left by injustices that time has yet to erase. Today you will learn about the 10 most absurd and painful cases of injustice that have ever occurred in Latin America. Each one reveals the cruelest side of human history, and the price many paid simply for existing. It all begins in 1924, in Argentina. In the middle of cotton plantations, Mocoit and calm indigenous communities protested against slave labor imposed by the government. What was supposed to be a peaceful demonstration turned into a nightmare. State troops surrounded the village of Napalpi and opened fire on men, women, and children. Bodies were scattered throughout the countryside. More than 400 lives were lost. Decades later, the country would recognize the crime as genocide, but nothing would bring back those silenced voices. Just over 20 years later, in 1947, another terrible episode once again stained Argentina. In Rincon Bomba, hundreds of Pilagá indigenous people were hunted as enemies within their own territory. The National Gendarmerie surrounded the communities, burned villages, tortured survivors, and murdered more than 700 people. Only in 2020 was the massacre officially recognized as genocide, and even then, the families remain without real justice. Now we move on to Guatemala. In 1982, the civil war had already destroyed the country, but nothing could prepare the world for the horror of Dos Aires. Special forces invaded the village and coldly executed more than 200 people. Children were thrown into wells, women raped and killed. A massacre planned, calculated, and covered up for decades. Only years later did the government acknowledge the crime, but forgiveness never came for those who lost everything. During the same period in El Salvador, the Sumpo River became a river of blood. Hundreds of peasants were fleeing the war when they were cornered by military forces. There was nowhere to run. Gunfire came from all sides. Entire families were wiped out. It is estimated that more than 500 people died trying to escape. No one was punished. Silence replaced truth. And in Mexico, October 2, 1968, will forever be remembered as the Tlatelolco massacre. Thousands of students were protesting for freedom and justice when the army surrounded the square and opened fire. The sound of gunfire echoed through Mexico City. Bodies fell while the government denied everything. Hundreds died, a massacre broadcast in silence to the world. To this day, families fight for the state to admit its guilt. But the story didn't stop there. In 1997, also in Mexico, in the small community of Actil, a group of pacifist indigenous people were praying when paramilitaries invaded. Children, pregnant women, and the elderly were brutally murdered. 45 lives were snuffed out. And the most revolting thing is that it was all done with the consent of local authorities. A crime planned to eliminate those who thought differently. Fast forward to recent times. In Peru, in January 2023, protests took over the streets of Juliaca. Indigenous peoples demanded respect, a voice, and dignity. The government's response was with bullets. 18 people died and over 100 were injured. Among the victims were teenagers, workers, and mothers. A massacre broadcast live on social media. And once again, justice stood idly by. We travel back in time to 1932, once again in El Salvador. Thousands of peasants and indigenous people revolted against the oppressive regime that left them in poverty. The government responded with mass extermination. More than 25,000 people died. Bodies were dumped in ditches, villages were burned, and a clear message was sent from those in power: whoever defies them will be eliminated. This episode became known as La Matanza, one of the largest massacres in Latin America, but perhaps the quietest horror also occurred in Guatemala between 1981 and 1983. The army, under the command of Efrain Rios Montt, launched a campaign of genocide against the Mayan people. More than 200,000 people were killed. Entire villages disappeared from the map. Women were raped, children executed, and elders burned alive. Decades later, the former president himself was tried for genocide, but the trial was overturned. An entire country witnessed impunity triumph. And we arrive in Brazil, in the heart of Mato Grosso do Sul. The Guarani Kaiwa people are experiencing a silent genocide. Murders, expulsions, suicides, and hunger abound. Their lands are invaded by ranchers, and the state turns a blind eye. Children grow up in camps on the side of highways, while their elders die waiting for justice. This is not an old chapter. It is happening now, before our eyes. These 10 cases are not just historical facts. They are warnings. They are open wounds that call for memory, empathy, and courage. Latin America is a land of resistance, but also of pain. Each of these stories carries the same stifled cry: justice. And the question that echoes to this day is simple, yet powerful. How many more times will we need to watch injustice prevail before we finally learn to fight for those who have no voice?